Welcome to the Playing Books podcast.
It's great to be here.
I was thinking about how we should start this one. Usually we jump right into a story or maybe a big theory from the book. But today I think we need to start with the feeling in the air, the general vibe of things right now.
The vibe, okay. I think I know where you're going with this. It's tense.
It's tense. It's fractured. That's the word that keeps coming to mind. You open up your phone, you look at the news, and it feels like everything is just grinding against itself. Polarization isn't some abstract concept anymore. It feels like, I don't know, physical.
It does. It feels like a chasm. And I think for a lot of people, that feeling leads to a kind of a paralysis. You see the sheer scale of the problems, the inequality, the political anger, this complete erosion of trust in everything.
Yeah.
And you just throw your hands up. You think, what can one person even do?
Yeah.
The script for how to fix this feels like it's been completely lost.
Exactly. And that is precisely why I am so glad we're discussing this book today. It's called The Idea of America: Reflections on Inequality, Democracy, and the Values We Share by Darren Walker. And reading it, it didn't feel like a typical memoir, and it definitely wasn't some dry policy paper from a foundation president.
No.
It felt like finding a compass. Like you're lost in a storm and suddenly someone hands you a compass that actually works.
That's a perfect way to put it, because a compass is exactly what he's trying to offer. And we should probably give some context on who Darren Walker is for anyone who might not be familiar.
Jeez, yeah.
He's been the president of the Ford Foundation for, over a decade now?
And let's just pause on that. The Ford Foundation, this isn't just any nonprofit. We're talking about an endowment of something like $16 billion.
A staggering amount of money. So he sits at this incredibly unique intersection of immense power, of capital, and a deep personal commitment to social justice.
It's such a rare combination.
It is. He's a man who walks in the halls of Davos and Wall Street. But his focus, his entire career, is fixed on the people who are locked out of those halls.
And that's what makes this book, The Idea of America, so compelling. He doesn't just preach from on high. He takes you on this journey that spans the entire American experience. We literally go from the dirt floor of a shotgun shack in rural Texas all the way to the boardrooms of Manhattan. And he connects those two worlds in a way that I honestly don't think I've ever read before.
He does. He frames the book as a blueprint. He's saying, look, the American experiment is fragile. It's in danger, no question.
Right.
But it's not a lost cause. It is salvageable. But, and this is the huge but, it requires us to completely rethink what we mean by generosity, what we mean by citizenship.
He has this core thesis that is, on the one hand, incredibly simple, and on the other, just terrifyingly complex. Let's just lay out the stakes for the listener before we dive into his story. What's the fundamental argument?
At its core, Walker is arguing two big things. First, that inequality, and he defines that really broadly, it's not just about money. It's inequality of voice, of dignity, of access, of respect. He says that is the single greatest threat to justice. And then, maybe even more urgently for right now, he argues that white supremacy is the single greatest threat to democracy.
And that you can't separate the two.
You can't. They're completely, inextricably linked. But the goal of the book, and really the mission for our conversation today, isn't just to, leave everyone feeling depressed about the state of the world.
No, it's the opposite.
It's the opposite. It's to unpack his argument that America isn't a finished product. It's a work in progress. He says it's a verb, not a noun. And he's inviting all of us, the readers, you, the listeners, to actually pick up a hammer and help with the construction.
There's this idea of a new gospel of wealth that we are absolutely going to get into because it just turns everything we think about charity on its head. But to understand his philosophy, you have to understand the man. You have to start with his almost unbelievable journey.
The origin story. That's our first section today. The improbable journey.
So let's really paint the picture. Let's go to Ames, Texas. The year is 1965. Darren Walker talks about this shotgun shack, and I think for a lot of us, that's just a phrase from a song,
Right. It's a cliche.
But for him, this was his reality. This was architecture as destiny.
Absolutely. He writes about it with such sensory detail. The dust, the oppressive Texas heat. He talks about how the house was built up on these cinder blocks, and you could actually see the chickens running around underneath the house through the cracks in the floorboards.
Wow.
There's no air conditioning, of course. But more than the physical discomfort, it was the isolation. Ames wasn't just a small town. It was a segregated town. It was a place explicitly designed to keep people in their place.
And he's being raised by a single mother, a nurse's assistant.
Right. He makes it very clear they had an abundance of love, but almost zero material resources.
Right.
I mean, statistically, he was a child who was set up to fall through every single crack in the system.
And yet, something happens. The outside world literally comes knocking on his door. You called this the clipboard moment when we were prepping. I just love that because it plays out like a scene in a movie.
It really does. So you have to imagine it. Darren is 5 years old. He's barefoot on the porch of this little house. And this stranger, a white woman, starts walking up the dusty path holding a clipboard.
Okay, so 1965, rural Texas. A white person with a clipboard walking up to a black family's home. That is not usually a good sign.
That is usually a sign of trouble. It means the census. It means an eviction notice. It means someone is there to ask questions you don't want to answer. The tension is just baked right into that image.
Yeah.
But she's not there for any of that. She's there to enroll him in a brand new experimental pilot program, a program called Head Start.
A name most people know now. It's this massive federal program, part of Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty.
It is now. But here's the detail that makes the story so incredible. In 1965, the government wasn't sure it would work. They didn't have the risk tolerance to just spend millions rolling it out nationwide without some proof of concept. They needed a pilot.
Okay.
And do you know who put up the risk capital? The seed money to pay for that woman with the clipboard to go knocking on doors in Ames, Texas.
Oh, no. Don't tell me.
It was the Ford Foundation.
That's almost too perfect. The very foundation that he now leads, the organization whose checks he now signs. They're the ones who funded the knock on the door that gave him a path off that porch.
It's the universe just folding in on itself.
Mm-hmm.
And Walker uses this story not to say, hey, look at this wild coincidence, but to explain the actual mechanics of social change. That moment, he says, was a bridge.
But a bridge between what?
Between government policy, the idea of Head Start, private philanthropy, the Ford funding that de-risked the pilot, and individual potential. This little 5-year-old boy named Darren Walker.
He says it so plainly. Head Start gave me my start.
He does. And this leads directly into one of the central arguments of the entire book. Walker takes a sledgehammer, an absolute sledgehammer, to the myth of the self-made man.
And thank goodness for that, because you read so many memoirs from successful people, CEOs, leaders, and there's always this narrative, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps, I just worked harder than everybody else, I did it all on my own.
The heroic individualist myth, yeah.
And Walker basically looks right at the reader and says, that is a fiction, it's a lie. Now, let me play devil's advocate for a second. He's not saying he didn't work hard, right? The guy is clearly brilliant and driven.
No, not at all. He's not discounting his own agency or his own effort. What he's arguing is that hard work on its own is not enough if there isn't a structure there to receive it. He says, my story is your story. And what he means by that is that nobody crosses the bridge to opportunity alone.
Right.
If the Pell Grant program doesn't exist, it doesn't matter how high his test scores are, he can't afford to go to the University of Texas. Simple as that.
And he's so specific about naming the people and the programs that formed that bridge for him, that Texas spirit he talks about.
He lists them out. His mother, first and foremost, who worked with such incredible dignity. The public school teachers in Goose Creek, Texas, who saw something in this poor black kid and decided to invest in him, not write him off.
And the Pell Grants, which is us. That's taxpayer money. That is the public saying, we believe in you.
Exactly. And then he zooms out even further. He pays tribute to the giants of the civil rights movement. He talks about John Lewis constantly. There's this incredibly powerful reflection he has on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. He says essentially that John Lewis marched into a wall of state troopers with billy clubs and tear gas so that 50 years later, Darren Walker could walk into a corporate boardroom.
He marched so I wouldn't have to.
That's the line. And that is the idea of America that he's trying to get us to understand. It's not about rugged individualism. It's about the collective structures, the bridges that we build to lift each other up. If you take away Head Start, if you take away the Pell Grant, if you take away the Civil Rights Act, there is no Darren Walker, president of the Ford Foundation.
There's just a brilliant kid in Ames, Texas, with no way out.
Exactly. It's a sobering thought. And it completely reframes what we mean by success.
It really does, which is a perfect transition to his career, because he didn't just go straight from college to running a foundation. He was a lawyer. He worked on Wall Street. But then in the 1990s, he makes this dramatic pivot. He goes to Harlem to work for the Abyssinian Development Corporation.
And this is where we get to section 2 of our chat. From generosity to justice. Because this time in Harlem is really where his entire philosophy gets forged in the real world.
So help us picture it. It's the 90s. Harlem is, well, it's facing a lot of challenges, but it's also a place of incredible culture and vibrancy. Walker shows up, young and ambitious, and he runs straight into a wall that he calls the tyranny of experts.
Oh, this story's a classic. And I think anyone who has ever worked in a big organization, a corporation, a nonprofit, government, you'll recognize this immediately.
Okay.
So Walker arrives, he's full of energy, and he's surrounded by these brilliant people, urban planners, sociologists, folks with PhDs from Ivy League schools. They've all come to fix Harlem. They've got these incredibly complex academic theories of change. They have binders full of charts and graphs and jargon.
And they already have all the answers before they even ask the right question.
That's it, exactly. They were looking at Harlem from 30,000 feet. They had these abstract models for revitalization. But what no one had bothered to do was go down to street level and ask the people who actually live there, hey, what do you think this neighborhood needs?
And when someone finally did ask, what was the answer? Was it some, complicated workforce development initiative?
Well, it's a supermarket.
A grocery store?
A grocery store.
Yeah.
On 125th Street. Because at the time, there wasn't a single full-service supermarket in the area. People had to travel long distances, often on multiple buses, just to get fresh, affordable food. The community didn't want to lecture on urban theory. They wanted lettuce.
They wanted the basic dignity of being able to buy food in their own neighborhood.
And for Walker, this was a lightning bolt moment. The experts were completely wrong, and the so-called regular people were completely right.
So he made it happen.
He did. They got a pathmark built on 125th Street. But the lesson from that experience became a cornerstone of his entire worldview. He calls it the importance of proximity. You have to get close to the problem. The people living with the issue, they almost always know the solution. They just lack the resources and the power. The experts, on the other hand, have the resources, but they often lack the lived knowledge.
It's such a fundamental flip of the traditional top-down model. The expert doesn't always know best. The person experiencing the injustice knows best.
Which brings us to the central tension in his philosophy of giving. This is where the book gets really, really provocative. He stages this intellectual battle between the historical icon of philanthropy, Andrew Carnegie, and himself.
Okay, let's unpack this carefully. Andrew Carnegie, the Gilded Age steel tycoon. He's the patron saint of American philanthropy. We have Carnegie Libraries, Carnegie Mellon University, Carnegie Hall. The guy's name is on everything.
He is the OG, for sure. In 1889, Carnegie writes this hugely influential essay called The Gospel of Wealth. It's basically the founding document of modern giving. And the idea was, pretty straightforward.
Go on.
You spend the first half of your life accumulating a massive fortune, and you can be as ruthless as you need to get it. Then in the second half of your life, you give it all away to worthy causes. And Carnegie argued that this act of giving dignifies the life of the wealthy man.
So the focus is on the donor. It's about my salvation. I can be a cutthroat robber baron for 40 years, bust unions, ruin my competitors, but as long as I build a library at the end of it all, I get to be remembered as a good guy.
You've nailed it. It's a transaction for redemption. It's about assuaging the guilt of extreme wealth. Walker labels that entire mindset generosity. And he argues that in the 21st century, generosity is no longer enough. We need something more. He proposes a new gospel of wealth. And the fundamental shift is from generosity to justice.
I want to pause here because this is a really uncomfortable idea for a lot of people. It sounds nice, generosity versus justice. But when you dig into what he actually means, he's essentially looking at the very people who fund foundations like his, the wealthy elite, and he's telling them, you are part of the problem.
He is. He's not just biting the hand that feeds him. He's questioning why that hand is so full of food in the first place, while so many others are empty. It's a radical stance.
So let's be really clear about the distinction. What is the practical difference between an act of generosity and an act of justice?
Generosity is charity. It's about treating the symptoms. It's writing a check to the food bank. It's giving a warm coat to a person who is homeless.
Yeah.
And Walker is very clear. Those are good and necessary things to do.
All right, he's not saying stop doing that.
Not at all. But justice. Justice asks why so many people need to go to the food bank in the richest country in the history of the world. Justice asks why that person is homeless to begin with. Justice is about attacking the root causes of the problem.
He has a line in the book that just floored me. He says, generosity is about giving back. Justice is about giving up.
That's the one. That is the razor's edge of his argument. That's the part that makes people squirm. Because generosity is comfortable. It allows you to keep all your power, all your privilege, and just sign a check from a distance. You get to feel good, but nothing fundamentally changes. You're still the benevolent king on the hill. Justice, however, requires you to interrogate your own privilege. It demands that you ask, is the system that allowed me to become this wealthy actually fair? And if the answer is no, are you willing to advocate for changes to that system, even if it means you might pay more in taxes, or your company might have to follow more regulations, even if it costs you some of your power?
That is a much, much harder thing to ask of people.
It's terrifying for those at the top.
Yeah.
But Walker's argument is that it's the only path forward if we want to save our democracy. We have to move beyond just giving back and start thinking about how to give up some of the systemic advantages that create such vast inequality in the first place.
And he's not just talking to billionaires. He's challenging everyone listening right now. In your own life, in your own community, are you just treating the symptoms? Or are you trying to understand and address the root cause? Are you just being generous? Or are you working for justice?
It's a profound question, and it leads us right into his diagnosis of America's current crisis, which is Section 3. He calls inequality an existential threat.
And he's not just using rhetoric. He brings the data. He brings the cold, hard facts to back it up.
He does, and there's one statistic in the book that just makes you stop and reread it to make sure you saw it correctly. The 3 wealthiest Americans own as much wealth as the bottom half of the entire population.
Let's just sit with that for a second. 3 individuals.
3 people.
Versus more than 160 million of their fellow citizens.
It's a concentration of wealth that is just mathematically and morally staggering. We haven't seen anything like it since the first Gilded Age, maybe not even then. And Walker's point is that this level of inequality isn't just unfortunate, it is asphyxiating the American dream.
Asphyxiating, that's a strong word.
It's the perfect word. Because if the ladder of opportunity is broken, if the bridge to a better life is out, then people lose hope. And he argues that when hope dies, democracy begins to die with it. People turn to demagogues, they turn to rage, they turn against the very system that they feel has failed them.
But he's also so good at pointing out that this isn't just about your bank balance. His definition of inequality is much broader.
It is. It's about inequality of voice. Who gets heard in the halls of Congress? It's about inequality of access. Whose kids get into the best schools? It's inequality of agency and respect. It's about who gets to tell the story of America and who gets written out of it.
And that, of course, goes back to the very, very beginning of the country. He spends a lot of time on what he calls the founding contradiction.
You have to. You can't have an honest conversation about the idea of America without confronting this. It is the nation's original sin. You have Thomas Jefferson, a slave owner, writing the most beautiful words in our history. All men are created equal.
The hypocrisy is just baked right in from day one.
It is. At the same time he's writing about unalienable rights, he's literally owning other human beings. Walker's own ancestors were counted as 3/5 of a person, not for their humanity, but as a cynical political calculation for power.
But, and this is the fascinating part of his argument, he doesn't use that contradiction as a reason to just give up on America. He doesn't say, the whole project was founded on a lie, so let's burn it all down.
No, he does the opposite. He uses it to redefine what we mean by American exceptionalism.
How so? Because that term is usually used to mean we're the best, we're morally superior, we're perfect.
Right. And Walker says that's nonsense. America isn't exceptional because we're perfect. We are so obviously not. He argues that America is exceptional because of the continuous act of perfecting. It's the struggle itself. It's the fact that we have the tools, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the power of protest to try and resolve that founding contradiction.
So America isn't a destination we've arrived at. It's a journey we're on. It's a verb.
It's a verb. It's the unfinished work, as Lincoln called it. And Walker is brutally honest about how difficult that work is and how even the people with the best intentions can get it wrong. Which brings us to this moment of incredible vulnerability in the book. We have to talk about his blind spot.
Yes, the Ford forward story. This is so important.
Okay, so you have to picture it. Walker is the new president of the Ford Foundation. He's launching this massive, visionary new strategy called Ford Forward. The entire mission is to focus the foundation's immense resources on fighting inequality, It's a huge deal. He gives this big, splashy speech.
He's feeling on top of the world. He's the new sheriff in town, ready to take on injustice.
Exactly. He's feeling righteous. And then he gets back to his office and opens his email. And there's a message from a woman named Mickey Adelson, who runs a home for people with disabilities. And she writes something like, Darren, I loved your speech. I love the new vision. But you just talked about inequality for an entire hour, and you did not mention the word disability once.
That must have felt like a punch to the gut.
And then the emails just kept coming in from the disability rights community.
Yeah.
And he has this horrifying realization that in his grand plan to fight inequality, he'd completely ignored and erased a community of over 1 billion people worldwide. And it gets worse. He realizes that the Ford Foundation's own headquarters, this beautiful, iconic, modernist building in New York City, this supposed temple of social justice, was almost completely inaccessible to people who use wheelchairs.
The irony is just staggering.
It's the ultimate blind spot. And he writes about it with such humility. He admits to his own privilege and ignorance. He doesn't make excuses. He just says, I was wrong. And how often do you hear a CEO or a powerful leader say that plainly?
Yeah.
Without any spin?
Almost never. Usually you get a non-apology apology. I'm sorry if anyone was offended.
Right. But Walker stopped everything. He publicly apologized, and he completely pivoted the foundation's strategy to make disability justice a central pillar of their work.
I just think that's such a vital lesson for all of us. If Darren Walker, a man whose entire life and career is dedicated to thinking about justice, can have a blind spot that enormous, then we all can. We all do.
It's about creating a culture where it's safe to be called out. It's about having the humility to listen to criticism without getting defensive. That right there is moral leadership.
Speaking of moral leadership in a crisis, let's talk about Detroit. Because this part of the book, Section 4, it honestly reads like a high-stakes financial thriller. I don't think most people appreciate how close that city came to an absolute cultural catastrophe.
The grand bargain. This is, without a doubt, one of the most creative and complex acts of civic philanthropy in modern American history.
So set the scene for us. The year is 2013-2014. Detroit is in absolute freefall.
It's the largest municipal bankruptcy in the history of the United States. The city owes something like $18 billion. The state-appointed emergency manager is looking at the city's books, and it's just a sea of red. So the creditors, the big banks and bond insurers, they start circling like vultures looking for assets they can seize and sell off to get their money back.
And their eyes land on the city's crown jewel.
The Detroit Institute of Arts, the DIA. It's one of the greatest public art collections in the country. We're talking priceless works by Van Gogh, Matisse, Diego Rivera's iconic Detroit industry murals. So the creditors hire Christie's auction house to come in and appraise the collection.
They're putting a price tag on a Van Gogh.
They value the city-owned art at somewhere between $450 and $860 million. So for the creditors, a Rembrandt isn't a masterpiece of human culture. It's just an asset to be liquidated. It's a check.
But on the other side of the equation, you have the city's workers.
You have 30,000 city workers and retirees, cops, firefighters, sanitation workers. They're being told that their pensions, the money they worked their entire lives for, are going to be slashed to the bone. They are facing utter financial ruin. So the media sets up this brutal, heartbreaking choice. Do you save the paintings or do you save the pensions?
Art or people?
That's a false choice, but a very powerful one. And Darren Walker and the Ford Foundation step into this mess and ask a different question. Why does it have to be either? Why can't we save both?
But how? I mean, where do you find almost $1 billion to solve a problem like that?
This is where philanthropy moves beyond just writing a check and becomes a form of high-stakes civic engineering. Walker helped orchestrate this incredibly complex deal. The first step was they had to get the art out of the city's ownership so the creditors couldn't touch it. They needed to move it into a private nonprofit trust. But to do that, they legally had to buy it from the city.
So who came up with the money?
It was a three-legged stool. A consortium of major foundations, led by Ford with a commitment of $125 million, put up a huge chunk. Then they convinced the state of Michigan to kick in hundreds of millions. And finally, they went to private donors and corporations in the Detroit area.
And they raised it all.
They created a fund of over $800 million.
And that money didn't go to the museum, it went to the pensioners.
That's the genius of it. The money went directly into the city's pension funds. That satisfied the creditors enough to get them to back off, and in exchange for that cash infusion, the ownership of the museum and its art was transferred to an independent trust where it would be safe forever. That was the grand bargain.
It's just brilliant. It's using philanthropic capital not as charity, but as a tool to restructure a civic crisis.
But Walker is very, very clear in the book to say that the real heroes of this story were not the foundation presidents or the billionaires writing the checks.
No. He shines the spotlight on two people named Shirley and Dawn.
Retired city workers. A married couple. See, for the whole deal to work, the city's unions, the workers, and retirees themselves had to vote to approve it. And the deal wasn't perfect for them. They still had to accept some cuts to their health care benefits and a very small cut to their pension checks. But the alternative was to vote no, let the bargain collapse, and risk losing everything in a protracted court battle.
And they voted yes.
They voted yes. They chose to take a small hit to save their city's soul and to protect their fellow retirees from a much worse fate. Walker holds them up as the ultimate example of civic virtue. That is, putting the good of the community above your own narrow self-interest.
And this all ties back to his bigger point about why art even matters. Because a skeptic might listen to this and say, okay, great story, but people are hungry. Why are we spending hundreds of millions of dollars to save a bunch of paintings on a wall?
It's a fair question to ask. But Walker's answer is that art is not a luxury. He says art is a market of empathy.
A market of empathy. What exactly does he mean by that?
He says that as a society, we suffer from a profound poverty of imagination. We have no trouble imagining incredible technological feats like sending people to Mars. We can imagine artificial intelligence. But we have a very hard time imagining a society without poverty. We struggle to imagine what it truly feels like to walk in someone else's shoes.
And art closes that gap.
Art is the bridge. It connects us to our shared humanity. It forces us to see the world through another's eyes. He quotes the Bible, where there is no vision, the people perish. If you strip a city of its culture, of its beauty, of the things that give life meaning beyond just survival, you strip it of its ability to imagine a better future for itself. Saving the DIA wasn't just about saving pretty pictures. It was about sending a message to every single person in Detroit that said, you matter. Your city matters. You are worthy of beauty. And that is a fundamental issue of justice and dignity.
It always comes back to dignity.
Always.
Okay, so we've covered the personal story, the core philosophy, the big dramatic intervention in Detroit. But I want to spend some time now in Section 5 on the practical lessons, because this book isn't just theory. Walker is very intentional about giving the reader and our listeners a toolkit for how to apply these ideas in their own lives.
He absolutely is. He doesn't want this to be a passive reading experience. And he gives us this brilliant framework. He takes Franklin Delano Roosevelt's famous Four Freedoms speech from 1941.
Freedom of speech, freedom of belief.
Freedom from want and freedom from fear. And he says, in the 21st century, we need to flip the script. Those freedoms now imply four responsibilities.
I love this part of the book because it's so direct and actionable. Let's walk through them one by one. So, FDR's freedom of speech, Walker says, becomes our responsibility to listen.
And he's not just talking about listening to the people you already agree with on your favorite news channel. He means a radical kind of listening. He means deliberately seeking out and hearing the perspectives of people you disagree with, even people whose views you find offensive.
Breaking out of the echo chamber.
Completely. Because free speech is only half of the equation. If we are all just broadcasting our own opinions into the void, that's not a democracy, it's just noise. A functioning society requires dialogue, and dialogue requires listening. So the challenge to you is, when is the last time you truly deeply listened to someone on the other side of a political issue, not to rebut them, but to actually understand them?
That is incredibly hard to do. It requires real discipline.
It's one of the hardest things. But our democracy might depend on it.
Okay, number 2. FDR's freedom of belief becomes our responsibility to accept.
And this one has a crucial nuance. He's not saying you have to agree with everyone else's beliefs. He's saying you have to accept the reality that we live in a pluralistic society. You have to accept that our diversity of backgrounds, faiths, and identities is a feature, not a bug.
It's the difference between tolerance and acceptance. Tolerance is passive. It's just, okay, I'll put up with you. Acceptance is active. It's, I recognize your right to be here and I see the value you bring.
That's it, exactly. It's about seeing our differences as a source of national strength, not a threat that needs to be contained or eliminated.
All right, third one. Freedom from want becomes our responsibility to serve.
This brings us right back to the bridge metaphor we started with. If you are fortunate enough to have freedom from want, if you have enough food, a safe place to live, financial security Walker argues you did not get there all by yourself. Someone served you. A parent, a teacher, a mentor, a government program. Therefore, you have a moral obligation to serve others.
He has that great line we mentioned earlier, if you have enough, your responsibility is to build the table longer, not the fence higher.
That's the gospel right there. If you have crossed the bridge to opportunity, your job is to turn around and make sure that bridge is sturdy for the people coming behind you.
And finally, number 4, freedom from fear becomes our responsibility to act.
This is all about moral courage. Fear is what keeps the status quo in place. We see an injustice, maybe it's a racist joke in the office, maybe it's a policy in our town that hurts the most vulnerable, and we stay silent. Why? Because we're afraid. We're afraid of losing our job, of being ostracized by our friends, of rocking the boat. And Walker is challenging us to overcome that fear and act, to be, in his words, the firefighters who run toward the flames of injustice, not the spectators who stand on the sidewalk and just watch it burn.
So I want to issue that challenge directly to everyone listening right now. Just pick one of those 4 for this week. Just one. Listen, accept, serve, or act. And make a conscious effort to do it. Ask yourself at the end of the day, did I truly listen today? Did I practice acceptance? Did I serve someone? Did I act when I saw something wrong?
That's the homework assignment from this podcast.
It is. Now, as we get to the final section of the book, section 6, the tone gets much more personal, much more intimate. He pulls back the curtain on his own life to talk about hope, love, and radical optimism.
He talks about his late partner, David. And this chapter is, on one level, a beautiful and heartbreaking love story. But it's also a profound lesson in leadership and what it means to be human.
Because Walker is this type A driven person. He's always on a plane to Davos. He's in back-to-back meetings. He's trying to save the world 24/7. And David was the person who kept him grounded.
He tells this wonderful, funny story about being on vacation in the British Virgin Islands. And Walker is, of course, pacing around the beach on his phone, checking his email, trying to solve some global crisis. And David just looks at him and says, "Darren, slow down.
Just stop.
Just stop. Just be here now." Walker admits that he could get intoxicated by the pace and the perceived importance of his work. And David was his anchor, the person who reminded him that you have to make space in your life for love, for connection, for just being.
It's such a humanizing moment. It shows that even the great Darren Walker, president of the Ford Foundation, needs someone in his life to tell him to put the phone away.
And then he writes with such searing honesty about David's illness and his death. But he connects that personal grief back to the book's larger theme. He says that love, that deep human connection, is the ultimate antidote to what he calls the cult of individualism that plagues our society. You can't be an effective bridge builder for humanity if you don't know how to truly love and connect with individual humans.
And all of that leads to his final and maybe his most important concept in the whole book, radical hope.
He's very deliberate with his words here. He distinguishes hope from mere optimism. Optimism can be very passive. It's just a sunny disposition, a belief that, oh, I'm sure things will work out for the best somehow.
Right. Hope is different. Hope is active.
Hope is a choice. He calls it the oxygen of democracy.
I love that phrase so much. Hope is the oxygen of democracy.
Because without it, the whole system just suffocates and dies. Radical hope means looking squarely at all the ugly, terrifying facts, the inequality stats, the history of racism, the political dysfunction, and despite all of that, making a conscious choice to believe that a better world is still possible, and then working to make it so. It's a stubborn, determined recognition of what we owe each other.
So it's not about ignoring the darkness, it's about looking straight into the darkness and still choosing to light a candle.
That's it, exactly. He closes by reminding us that democracy has no finish line. It's not a thing you achieve and then it's done. It's a perpetual relay race. We've been handed the baton by generations before us, by John Lewis on that bridge, by the suffragettes, by the labor organizers. Our job is to run our leg of the race as hard and as honorably as we can, and then successfully pass that baton to the next generation.
So after all that, what's the big takeaway for you, for me, for everyone listening?
For me, it's that we have to stop waiting. We have to stop waiting for some perfect politician or some benevolent billionaire to come and save us. The idea of America isn't some dusty document in the National Archives. It's a living thing. It's us. It's in the daily choices we make.
It's how we treat the person at the grocery store checkout.
It's whether we vote in the local school board election. It's whether we speak up or stay silent when we hear a bigoted comment. It's whether we choose to build a longer table or a higher fence.
We are the architects.
We are all the bridge builders.
That feels like the perfect place to land this conversation. This book, The Idea of America, is so much more than a memoir. It's a challenge. It's a user's manual for how to be an engaged citizen in these troubled times.
I could not agree more. It's essential reading.
So, my final challenge to you, our listener, is this. Let the ideas in The Idea of America, reflections on inequality, democracy, and the values we share, do more than just inform you. Let them enhance your life. Don't just consume this content. Try to apply that new gospel to your own interactions this week. And if this conversation resonated with you, I truly, highly encourage you to go out and purchase the book.
Absolutely. We barely scratched the surface. His essays on the future of capitalism, on technology and digital rights, it's all in there. And it's all brilliant.
And please engage with Darren Walker online. He is active on social media. He wants this to be a real conversation, not a monologue from on high.
Let's keep that relay race going.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us on this episode. We know your time is precious, and we are grateful that you chose to invest it in these important ideas with us.
It has been a real pleasure. Remember, we're all bridge builders.
If you enjoyed this podcast, we'd be so grateful if you would follow, subscribe, and maybe share the Playing Books podcast with a friend who you think could use a dose of radical hope right now. Until next time, keep building.
Goodbye, everyone.